Let's return again to the Northern Theater. Now recall at the beginning of 1778, General Howe was stationed in Philadelphia. He was preparing his legal defenses because he knew that the failure at Saratoga rested in part on his shoulders. Washington was repairing his army at Valley Forge, and Congress had created the Articles of Confederation, which weren't entirely legal yet, but the nation was acting as if they were. With the French entering the war, things immediately changed for Britain. Parliament immediately repealed all of the parliamentary acts that had so enraged the American populace. They just canceled all of them. And Britain sent a peace commission, headed by the Earl of Carlisle, to negotiate peace with America. Again, that commission was headed towards Philadelphia. And they intended to recognize Congress, which was the first time that Britain had chosen that particular tactic in negotiations. But the Carlisle Peace Commission reached Philadelphia at the same time that General Clinton took over the British Army. Howe had in fact been recalled to London, and General Clinton now had been directed to secure New York City and abandon Philadelphia. So a strange coincidence occurs. Just as the Peace Commission from Britain arrives in Philadelphia, General Clinton is given orders to withdraw from Philadelphia. So when the Peace Commission talks to Congress, Congress can see that the British position is actually quite weak, and so no peace is actually negotiated. 5 days later, the British abandoned Philadelphia in June 1778. Clinton knew that the French were coming, and he was afraid that a French fleet would sail in towards Philadelphia and trap him in between the French fleet and Washington's forces at Valley Forge, located only 20 miles away. So he quickly retreated from Philadelphia back up to New York City. Washington found out about it a few days later and went and took Philadelphia for the American side, and then harassed the British all the way back to New York City. There was one more battle at Monmouth, which was a bit of a stalemate, and then the British retreated to New York City. That was the last major battle of the Northern Theater between the British and the American sides. Now, Britain was in a difficult situation. They knew that France had entered the war. They had already heard that France was attacking their colonies in the Caribbean. And recall that I said that those Caribbean colonies were far more valuable than the 13 American colonies. They knew they needed to protect those Caribbean colonies, but New York City was a great distance. Further, they had already discovered that given enough time, the militia in New England and the militia in the middle colonies would arrive in huge numbers. In fact, it had become pretty clear that they could barely hold New York City. They certainly could not hold New York City and Philadelphia, or New York City and Boston. They could only hold one city. It was simply that there were so many militia who had now turned to the Patriot side that the numbers were overwhelming. So they realized there was a partial solution. In the South, they believed, there were more loyalists. Remember all those families, those wealthy families that had bought all that land and created those plantations. During the war, they had been writing to their families back in Britain, and they had been telling them what's going on. And they had been giving the impression that there were so many loyalists in the South that if the British Army came south, they would find all kinds of allies. That's much different than what they were experiencing in New England and the middle colonies. So the British thought, if we moved south, we would not only have a harbor that's close enough to the Caribbean to defend our colonies, but we will also find lots of loyalists who will join our side. And so the British set sail for the Caribbean. Clinton was ordered to send 5,000 of his troops, about a quarter of them, all the way down to the Caribbean to reinforce some of the more important islands. And then part of his fleet also left New York City. In late December of 1778, the British attempted to capture Savannah, Georgia. And while there was a force of about 1,000 American patriots defending the city, Clinton sent around 3,000 and a large navy, and they quickly captured Savannah. And by doing so, they effectively split southern Georgia from the other parts of the colonies. They had their harbor closer to the Caribbean, and now they began trying to recruit loyalists. My main point in telling this story is for us to realize that when France entered the war, Britain had to react. And so what they chose to do was focus on the American South. From 1778 on, most battles would occur in the American South.